Well, there are always middle grounds, and then the challenge is to reach that middle ground. But the Iranian counter proposal, one which says let's end the conflict first, then talk about the nuclear issue, is in keeping with its interest. Does Iran want to enter negotiation? The question isn't whether Iran is ready to negotiate or not. The question is how, and it knows that it needs to compromise, but it does not want to compromise such that it appears as though it has capitulated. So it makes sense for the Iranians to say, let's end the conflict first, because that allows them to look like, hey, they got their word in and they were able to then compromise based on with relative strength, if you will, on the bargaining table. Because everybody's looking for leverage. The Iranians are looking for leverage. But I will say that they did, advance this idea, but they are also well aware that this is probably not going to work. So it's the classic bargaining, haggling that we're seeing right now. And the risk that the Iranians face is that if they bargain too hard, then it could lead to a resumption of hostilities. Well, look, all these moves, whether it's the Iranian disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's the American blockade of the broader Persian Gulf waterway, they're all designed to gain leverage. They're all designed to put pressure on the other side. Now, pressure from Iran and pressure from the United States is obviously not equal in magnitude, because both sides are very different from a military capability point of view, strength point of view. So the Americans did this blockade of the broader waterway because it was a counter to the disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, because it's again denying leverage to the Iranians. So again, this is part of the process. This is part of the back and forth that you do. It's like a chessboard where you're moving pieces around in order to advance your overall strategic position. So these are tactics. And I think that this is going to be part of the conversation, but we'll just have to wait and see. I have not seen anything specific from the president other than that he does not like the counter proposal. I haven't seen anything come out beyond that. But I have to believe that the Americans are working on communicating their official reaction to this latest offer from the Iranians, and obviously it's going through the Pakistanis. Of course, because again, like I said, that they want to do a deal, but they don't want to look like they've done it under duress, under pressure. And so this, in my view, is not about the substantive issues. I think that the substantive issues, there is going to be a compromise. Iran has to compromise on the issue of enrichment, on the issue of support for proxies, armed proxies, and the issue of the ballistic missiles. But those conversations can only happen if Iran does not look like it's surrendering. And this is the ultimate problem of these types of negotiations and how you manage them in the public relations realm. So the Iranians say something that looks like the Trump White House, its position is weak. Then the president and his people say something that makes the other side look bad. So how do you reach that equilibrium where you understand that you don't need to respond anymore? And so I think that this is part of the engineering of the entire deal, because otherwise, in the Iranian imperative is very clear. They can't just, they need not just an end, a permanent end to hostilities. They need a pathway to recovery. The regime needs to be able to rehabilitate itself. I wrote a piece on Thursday on what the regime could look like moving forward. Because to me, uh, the issue is not how the war ends as much as what it leaves behind in Iran. And if somehow the United States decides that, look, you know what, they're not ready to come to terms with us, then the United States will probably go into another brief phase of hostilities and then unilaterally call an end to the hostilities while keeping the sanctions in place, actually reinforcing them. And that leaves Iran in a very bad situation. So, for that reason, I think there's going to be a deal at some point. Now, the clock is ticking for the president. The president is facing a lot of domestic political economic fallout, and so he has to be able to do this pretty quickly. You know, where the he you know we're in now May. This is early May, and elections are in early November. Meanwhile, the price of gasoline in the United States is still very high, and actually, it went down and then went back up, and it's creating a lot of uncertainty. The popularity of the president was low to begin with, and it's also taking a further hit. And at the same time, the war is unpopular. Right now, there isn't, if you will, commotion, public unrest on the war, regarding the war, but he doesn't want to get to that point. So he needs it done faster. So and the Iranians also need to get this thing over with. So that's why I think I'm confident that there's a good chance that we will see some sort of an understanding, some sort of an agreement, or a deal. But the question is, when. And even on that front, I don't see this going on for months. So that's the impression they're creating. That's the if you will, the info ops tradecraft of the Iranians, that they are giving this impression that they can shut the strait down. The reality, they know the real situation that they're in. That yeah, you can keep firing missiles across the Gulf and create havoc in the waterway, leading to its disruption, and you can send in fast boats to create another perception of, Iran has the ability to shut this down. But there's a huge cost that comes with it. Okay, and I don't think they're very confident. I think they're operating from, they're projecting confidence. There's a difference between projecting confidence, which is a necessary part when you try to negotiate. It's like playing poker. You have to have a poker face, and you have to say, no, I'm in a very strong position, and I don't need to budge. But only you know how bad the situation is. And in this case, it's not an analytical leap to say that Iran's political economic situation is one of existential crisis. The president has a political economic crisis. His party can lose badly in the midterms, but that's political economic. For the regime, it's the existential in nature. Yeah, I mean, the as I wrote in my piece on Thursday, there are two pathways for the president. One pathway is that there's a deal, that all this pressure that he's bringing to bear, the threat of fresh strikes, the rejection of the latest offer from Iran, the blockade of the waterway, all of these could potentially lead to a deal. Okay. See, the problem is all we go by are the statements that are put out in the media. Whereas the reality is that there's a lot happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of back and forth. It's constant. Has to be. That's just the very nature of haggling and negotiating. Everybody's trying to drive a hard bargain. So that's one pathway. The other pathway is that if the president cannot achieve this, then he can impose a blockade, and at the same time, a blockade of the Iranian ability to export, but at the same time, assist shipping. U.S. naval ships can escort commercial shipping through the waterway closer to the Arabian Sea. Those technical details need to be worked out. But I think that that is not the preference of the president. I think the president wants to have a deal, but if he can't get one, he has a fallback position. I don't know what the Iranian fallback position is, and I don't think there is, because the Iranian need is one that is tied to an A, end to hostilities, permanent end, B, which is far more important than A, which is sanctions relief and sanctions respite. Without that, Iran knows that it'll just go in a long-term state of decay, and it doesn't want to go down that path. So I think that we need to bear this in mind. Yeah, I mean, there's that risk, but I would describe it as follows. I think that what will happen is that the I wouldn't call it a frozen conflict. I would just say that it would be a simmering conflict in the Persian Gulf, and that requires a longer term problem, a longer runway, if you will, to resolve. Because we can't assume that if they can't reach a deal now, that they won't reach a deal, say, a few months from now or later. At the end, there has to be a deal. The question is not whether there will be a deal. The question is what that deal will look like and when it will come. And if you look at the imperatives of the Iranians, you look at the imperative of the president, everything points to this not becoming a simmering conflict or a frozen conflict, or a long-term problem. But what will be long-term is sort of the post-war situation, because we don't know what the post-war situation. We can't assume, even if there is a deal, that everything will go back to what it was. There's no going back to what was. We're now in a new era. There are lots of things that will still be an issue, and they will have to be dealt with over the long haul. So one is the long-term threat of Iranian missiles and drones to the Arab states. And then how does Iran move forward? Because we can't assume that a deal will necessarily lead to the Iranians stabilizing their situation. Once they're done with this sort of war situation, they have to focus inward. And then we'll see all sorts of political change and political commotion, not just intra-elite, but also with the Iranian people trying to have more of a say. Because the old system is gone, and there's a new system in which the guards are asserting themselves, but they can't run the place by alone. They need other actors as well. How that internal equilibrium balances itself out or not is something that will be with us for the long term. And it will not be just a domestic Iranian political problem. It will have repercussions beyond Iran. So yes, maybe fighting will end. Maybe there'll be a deal and there will be some sanctions respite, assuming we go down that pathway. But that is not the end of this conflict. That's just sort of the end of hostilities. But the conflict will then move into another phase. And that phase will have to play itself out based on the variables that I just outlined. No, I don't. I mean, it depends on how you look at asymmetric, conventional, and nuclear threats. Asymmetric threat has always been there. I mean, what is Hezbollah? What are Iraqi Shia militias? What was the mobilization of militias in Syria? What was the support for Hamas and Houthis? All of this are asymmetric. And this is not new. This has been going on for a very long time. So the asymmetric threat is not going to be new. What the new threat is conventional, which is ballistic and cruise missiles and drones. That's part of that's not asymmetric, that's conventional now, because drones are now part of conventional warfare. So that is a major issue for which there is no solution. But the problem that the Iranians, the nuclear issue is something that is of far more importance to the United States, because, and it's more urgent, if you will, because what it does is if Iran somehow, a few years down the line, crosses the nuclear Rubicon, then we have a North Korea on the Persian Gulf. that has a gun to the, it can hold the world hostage, the region hostage, and that's not where we want to go. That's not where the Arab states want to go. That's not where Turkey, Pakistan, even the Russians or the Chinese want to go. It's another thing that the Americans and the Israelis are actually doing something about it, but nobody else is in favor of that outcome. So we have to look at these things in separate segments. And so that's why if you look at the three core demands of the United States from the very beginning, when President Trump took office, he had three demands and they're still there. You can't have a pathway to nuclear weapons. We need to verify that that's the case. Number two, you can't support armed proxies. Number three, there has to be something done about your ballistic missile capability because geography allows you to strike at will. And until this war happened, that was seen as a hypothetical. But now it's no longer a hypothetical. Therefore, it is far more. If I had to choose between the three, I think the threat of ballistic missiles and drones is probably the most difficult one to solve. How do you sort of put a cap on a country's ballistic missile capabilities, given the short geographic distance from the Arab states to the Iranian coast? You're looking at a very narrow waterway, and just how are you going to cap the range there? That is a long-term threat, and that requires a political settlement, and that requires that the Iranian regime alter its behavior and its outlook, its strategic outlook. It cannot be a revisionist state and then have the other states think that it's all fine. There are a lot of countries that have ballistic missile capability, but they're not revisionist state. They're not out to undo the security architecture of the region in their favor. And whenever that happens, in this case it's Iran, it could be somebody else tomorrow. That's not acceptable. And that's where I think that the North Korean and the Iranian cases are more of a contrast than a comparison. Well, I mean, any standoff requires a mix of carrots and sticks. So you offer incentives, you sweeten the offer, you try to incentivize that. Hey, if you gave this up, this is the benefit that you could gain. Okay, so that's one side of one area in which the United States could make it far more of an attractive offer. And we can go into the details, but everybody understands what I'm saying. The other is, while you do that, you also, basically hold that stick and make it a credible threat. That, hey, if you don't do this, there's a lot to lose, and here's how. And so that's the only way to get the Iranians to come to the table and finalize this agreement. Otherwise, as long as the Iranians believe they have room to maneuver, they won't come. This is a classic case of the need to compel, and compellence is a function of both material incentives and physical threats. So you can't divorce what the negotiation on Ukraine from the negotiation in Iran. In fact, President Putin called up President Trump late last week, and they had a conversation on both conflicts. Essentially, what the Russians are saying are, we can help you on Iran, we can convince Iran to come to the table, but we need something on Ukraine. Okay, we need you to accept some of our demands on Ukraine. So it's a quid pro quo type of situation. And it's not really clear where the United States is, because we just don't have a whole lot of information, and there isn't a whole lot of movement. And the Russians are also worried about the upcoming negotiation between President Trump and his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, in Beijing in the middle of this month, in just a couple of weeks from now, less than a couple of weeks from now. So this is a complicated negotiation. So yeah, I mean, from an American point of view, it needs to keep the oil prices down. So if waiving some of the sanctions on Russian ability to export can do that, then that's good, because it's a temporary measure. But in the meantime, it's also saying to the Russians, I'm willing to work with you. Okay. And let's cut a deal. So we'll appreciate your help on Iran, but let's also work on a deal on Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, after everything that is done, the president wants to come out looking like he really solved these problems. He needs to show progress that, yes, there was pain. Yes, there was commotion in the international energy markets and the second and third order financial and economic problems that resulted from that. But it was all worth it because, look, I have a deal now in the making in Iran, and I have a deal now in the making in Ukraine, and I'm having a deal, an accommodation, or at least I'm in the process of an accommodation with the Chinese. So it's more of, so he's trying to time these things. This is his strategy. Will he be successful? I can't say for sure right now.